So what can Salesforce customers particularly do better in your opinion, Vernon? And what's the sort of
Mhm.
path to the promised land here?
There's one interesting thing. Actually, this story came out of a mutual friend, Elements Cloud, who was part of our study, and they're recently part of Salesforce reference on using Agentforce. And they managed to create agents that did like HR things for them or like office things for them. And they personified these agents to some degree and fulfilled almost my vision of the virtual employee with it a little bit, where it fulfilled a role in the organization. And that was sufficient ROI for them. So if you add a new 24/7 HR agent to your office, what's the ROI on that? How do you measure it? At some level, it's just there and that's great. Wouldn't it be great if you could hire somebody to do that? So what is the fractional value of hiring somebody full time to do that? It's like 1/100th, obviously, or it's something low, but it's still there. So I think there is some of that going on. I think that you can look at role replacement or role and new role, adding new roles with AI teammates or something like that is a new way I've seen.
I can share a little bit of what I'm seeing with other customers and
Yeah.
see if that makes sense. Back to what you were saying, the lack of internal experience, I think it's a profoundly important aspect. And a way to get around it is to do something really small, but very clear, very direct use case. Preferably something that is more internal, like the HR example you gave, versus I have a chatbot on a website, so that you have enough confidence you can build, you can wet your feet a little bit, and then progressively build upon that, open it to your partners and the people who are within your sort of broader organizational circle of trust, and then eventually open it out to customers. That could be one way to doing it, but predominantly start small and then eventually build on that is what I've seen with the winners, if you will. And I've spoken with a lot of customers who just want to boil the ocean with AI, and I've not seen much meaningful progress there. Are you finding that in your study?
Yeah, we found that for sure. That's like the antidote to the CEO FOMO, basically,
Correct.
because CEO FOMO is the opposite of that. So you're talking about some guy just using GPTfy to enhance a workflow or to make something easier and just use the document processing capabilities or something to just do something easier. And then he learns how to do it. And then he looks around and then maybe he says, oh, maybe this agent, that stuff I'm hearing about could do this process. And then that's the whole grassroots thing. Yeah, for sure. And smart managers should figure out how to encourage that type of thing. The common prescription is a hackathon in a large company or something to try to bring those people out, or a skunk works where you might invite, again, this would be a very large company, like 10,000 employees that has kind of like the center of excellence type resources or something like that.
Again, mid to large, so about 5,000 to maybe 50, 60,000 employees. I've seen this across the board. Hackathons in general, I've found have not been very successful.
That's why I said the common prescription is that.
Right.
I
Yeah,
don't know
so
if it's
true. So like POCs or pilots that may be like generate an account 360 for my account. Help me do account planning because like we integrate with Microsoft Copilot as well. So you can just run it from Copilot, bring data from Salesforce, generate out an account. Or you're doing call logging with voice, right? Like
Mhm.
use cases, but internally focused for sales or for CSM and things like that. And then eventually broaden it out, invest significantly more once you have built enough internal competence and also trust, because like you mentioned, you try to do even tiny little thing in a 50,000 employee company, you have governance, you have AI COE, you have enterprise architecture review board. So you have to, even for that tiny little thing, the good news is you will run into a lot of internal constraints and you will pour the foundation versus the bank example you give where it is you've invested so much in a very waterfall style model and bam, you run into governance and this thing is there's a failure to launch.
Oh, yeah, and that's gonna happen all the time at big companies or certain industries. So that's something to be aware of. I think one other thing in our study I'd like to give people a thing to think about is we came up with a taxonomy or a way to describe applications that you might choose for your solutions. And GPTfy is like a great example of what we call an overlay AI application, meaning that you have an architecture where you're flexible. You can work with any kind of substrate, so to speak, source of data, context, or whatever. And you even have a bring your own key thing, which is remarkable. People love that. So that you could use your own Vertex or whatever as your setup to do that. And so that you have, that's like a very optimal way to do AI processing from an efficiency perspective, because you're controlling all the tokens, you're doing all that kind of stuff, and you can have really fine control of it. And that's versus the agent force in a way. I think GPTfy is a great alternative if you're not ready to turn the key on agent force, because agent force is like a whole thing, right? There's hesitation because of cost and governance and the fact you're doing a thing to an org that might have thousands of people on it. Even though I must say there's the developer org and you can play around with it on your own for free. So that's not a barrier if you're a developer. So I think Agentforce is out there. But you can just imagine if 5 years from now, somehow all of the overlay apps, and not just GPTfy, but they just kind of like spread around all over the place. There's going to be a reaction to it. And it's kind of like how in the industry, there's always like a bundling and unbundling phase. Right now, we're unbundling. So you're getting apps like GPTfy, Decagon, Maven AGI, Sierra, and a whole bunch of others, like 100 others that people are using to get immediate value out of AI by having systems that can connect to different parts of their existing data architecture. So they don't have to do all the activation energy and worry about data gravity and all that other kind of stuff too. So that's why the overlays right now are popular.
True. Very well said. I think there is a use case for either of these approaches, overlay versus an embedded type solution. And I think customers are just trying to figure out which is the right path for them. And I actually think that they're both extremely legitimate options. Just figuring out the use case is where I think a lot of people that I speak with are.